Okay, so if you've been following politics over the past couple of months, you'll know that Joe Biden is absolutely obliterating Donald Trump in the general election polling. You can see here this new poll out from Quinnipiac showing Joe Biden beating back Donald Trump in a massive 52 to 37 point margin. An insane 15-point lead for Joe Biden. Guys, this is literally historic in many respects. If this margin were to hold, now I don't necessarily think it will. I do think that the margins are going to tighten up closer to November at least a little bit, but nonetheless, though, if these numbers did hold, it would be literally the largest landslide for a presidential candidate that I've seen in my entire lifetime. Literally, not figuratively, literally the landslide of a lifetime. These numbers that we're looking at, guys, are no joke. I don't think that a lot of people can really picture or really imagine what a 15-point landslide or even a 10-point landslide, which is what the polling aggregators right now are suggesting. So let's break down this poll numbers. Let's break down the data. And actually, I do think that some of the poll data here, actually, when sort of analyzed, can explain some of the actions that we've seen from the Donald Trump campaign more recently as they try to pivot their message over the past couple weeks to try to catch up at least a couple points with Joe Biden. So you can see here, on literally every single key issue, Joe Biden is beating Donald Trump, which puts Donald Trump in a particularly precarious spot when it comes to the general election. Because usually there'll be, situations where, you poll the candidates and okay, sure, this candidate is losing, but there may be a few issues out there where that candidate is still leading with the voters. And so what the strategists do who are working on the campaign is they'll try to pivot a message to try to focus voters' minds on those key issues which that candidate is still popular in. In the case of Donald Trump, he's in a really tough spot. He's really in a tough spot because on basically all the key issues that we're going to look at here, Joe Biden is leading Donald Trump. So you can see here, voters now give Biden a slight edge over Donald Trump in a matchup when it comes to handling the economy. Handling the economy, guys, is typically an area where Republicans do particularly well. You can see here, voters favoring Joe Biden to Donald Trump in a 50 to 45 point margin on the economy. So this is incredibly important. So I'm going to come back to the issue of the economy in just a second here. But let's talk about these other issues here. So you can see here on handling a crisis, Biden 57-38. On handling healthcare, Biden 58-35. On handling the coronavirus response, Biden 59-35. On addressing racial inequality, Biden 62-30. Now, I said I was going to come back to the issue of the economy because all of these issues are incredibly important, but I think the economy one is most telling of all. Historically, as I was saying, voters tend to think, for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure, but tend to think that Republicans do a better job with the economy. Again, I'm not quite sure why this is the case. There isn't much evidence to back up this idea, but that tends to be the way in which voters feel. They tend to think that, well, Republicans are good with the economy and that Democrats may be good on issues such as healthcare or something like that. And so you can actually end up predicting elections quite accurately by trying to measure and trying to figure out what voters are valuing most at any particular given time. Are they valuing healthcare more or are they valuing the economy more? And then that can sort of, determine at least to a significant margin how voters may go in a general election. In this case, as you can see with this data here, that typical strategy may not particularly work. And we remember a few months back, actually maybe just 1 month ago or so, we were really talking about Mitch McConnell really focusing in on trying to reopen the economy. Now, they still are, but the messaging has changed a little bit, and I think that this polling really explains why some of that messaging has changed. You'll remember that one of the major strategies which Mitch McConnell and a number of Republicans were doing was trying to focus on reopening the economy. And the reason for that, of course, was because on the public polling at the time, it was showing that Joe Biden was beating Donald Trump overall, but that Joe Biden was still losing to Donald Trump when it came to the economy. Voters were still thinking, they still associated Donald Trump with a good economy. They thought that, well, once this crisis is over, Donald Trump will be best to handle the economy and he may be, he'll be able to recover best. And so the Republicans were hoping that if we could force a reopening earlier, that voters would have it in their heads, would have it in their minds that, okay, now we're focusing on rebuilding the economy after this crisis, and that hopefully that would lead to a situation where voters would then go to the ballot box and support Donald Trump. That was the strategy that which Republicans were really trying to aim at. And more recently, we've seen the messaging really shift over to debates about school reopening, which of course is a sort of Trojan horse message to try to get us to reopen the economy, but they've reframed it importantly. And I think that some of this polling really explains it, which is that even now voters are beginning to distrust Republicans on the economy. And so directly trying to reframe it as we're trying to reopen the economy may not be the most successful message for Republicans anymore. And so what they're trying to do is sort of Trojan horse the issue of the economy into an issue about school reopening. Because, of course, we can't reopen the economy until we reopen schools. Because for a lot of people, they have children and they can't really go to work, or, it becomes a lot more difficult to balance the home-work dynamic if their children are still students at home as opposed to students at school. So this is a situation right now where what the Republicans are trying to do is turn the debate into school reopening into a cultural fight so that then they can reopen the economy after they've already gained a few points by, again, reframing it as a cultural issue. Just one example, we saw Betsy DeVos come out on the Sunday shows talking about, for instance, school choice. She was saying, well, what we're going to do, of course, is allow schools to, have their own local decisions, which, of course, right, obviously, what's going on in rural Iowa is obviously different than what's going on in Phoenix. Duh, nobody disagrees with that, right? But then she says, well, we want to pressure them to reopen, and one of the things which we can do is school vouchers. Now, this, of course, is something which Betsy DeVos has been a longtime fan of and which Republicans have long time, been sort of fighting for, believing that, a kind of idea of school choice and then draining the public system, the public education system is the way to go. Now, of course, I disagree with that personally, but that's their strategy. And Republicans right now are trying to reframe the issue of reopening the economy into a cultural fight in that way, right? Trying to reframe the issue of reopening the economy into a cultural fight, and they're hoping that that can be a major success for them when it comes to the ballot box. Because again, one of the things that we've talked about on this channel is how Donald Trump right now has two major strategies when it comes to trying to win this thing. Because again, the polls numbers right now do not look good for Donald Trump. They just don't. No matter how big of a fan of Donald Trump you may be, you look at these poll numbers, they don't look good for Donald Trump. These numbers, these margins are way, way more than Hillary Clinton's margins were in the polling over Donald Trump leading up to 2016. But again, there's two major strategies right now which the Trump campaign is trying to run with. One, they're trying to pitch Biden as a vessel for the far left. We saw an ad come out from the Donald Trump campaign, basically depicting Joe Biden's face over the Trojan horse, and then they had, I'm not going to lie, this ad cracked me up quite a bit. Then they had Bernie Sanders, Ilhan Omar, AOC inside of the vessel of the Trojan horse and then climbing out, and that, as if the far left was, as if Joe Biden was a vessel for the far left. I'll tell you what, guys, my politics. I wish that were the case. But that was that's the strategy which the Trump campaign is trying to run with. Pitch Joe Biden as a vessel of the far left so that those moderate swing voters don't switch over and go vote for Joe Biden thinking, well, Joe Biden isn't all that bad. They want to try to pitch to those swing voters to sort of get worried and think, well, if I vote for Joe Biden, I'm actually voting for the far left. That's one of the things they're trying to do. The second thing that they're really trying to do is lean into the cultural war. We see Donald Trump, and we also, in fact, see Tucker Carlson, who, by the way, Donald Trump, we have multiple reports now that Donald Trump has been asking Tucker Carlson for political advice. One of the things that Tucker Carlson has been doing on his show, and again, Donald Trump as well, is really leaning into the cultural fight, really focusing on issues of, black on black crime or issues of Confederate statues, thinking that that can really be a margin of victory for them. Now, unfortunately, though, I will say that this poll has bad news for them even on that issue. So I was looking at the breakdown in this particular poll for the Confederate statues. So let's find that section here. You can see here on the issue of Confederate symbols, you can see here voters say in a 54 to 40 point margin that they support removing Confederate statues from public spaces around the country, and voters support the renaming military bases and voters support renaming military bases which are named after Confederate generals in a 51 to 42 point margin. So it doesn't seem like that angle of a cultural war is going to be particularly successful for for Donald Trump either. So this is, in all honesty, this is a disaster for Donald Trump. When you look at this poll, and again, when you look at all the other polls as well, it really goes to show a major situation right now where Donald Trump is getting obliterated. In fact, if you also look at the general approval rating, so this is of course on 538, which aggregates a bunch of different polls together, so it's not just one poll. You can see here, this is the approval rating for the entirety of his presidency. You can see this massive divergence of approval rating due to the coronavirus crisis here. You can see here, right about when the coronavirus thing started getting, we did see a bump in Donald Trump's approval rating, a sort of rally around the flag effect at the get-go of this thing, saying, look, we're behind the president, let's go, let's handle this crisis. But then very quickly, voters began to turn on Donald Trump, and we've ever since been seeing this massive divergence grow on approval rating where Donald Trump is being approved of less and less by voters. Now, I want to quickly go back to this divergence between sort of cultural issues and economic issues, right? I want to just make a brief tangent to make a quick philosophical point here, which is that we often try to frame political issues as there are economic issues over here and then there are cultural issues over here, and those issues are separate, right? Cultural issues are separate from economic issues. But I think that this crisis and the result and the way in which Republicans are trying to frame things afterwards show us that there's this clean distinction between economic issues and cultural issues is a bit of a fantasy. It's a bit of a neoliberal artifact, in my judgment. These things are not as distinct as some people make them out to be. For instance, right now, trying to frame an issue of reopening schools as a cultural issue when really it's an economic issue because the debate is getting people to go back to school. So in some sense, you could argue that these cultural issues are collapsing into economic issues as well. But you also need to remember that at the end of the day, the economy is still a symbol of social status. For instance, people are more likely to open a door for people who, are dressed up in a suit, look like they're wealthy, as opposed to someone who may be homeless or looks like they're a little bit more low income. So we afford social status to people who are of high wealth, like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, right? We afford social status to people who are wealthy. So I don't believe that there is a clean distinction between economic issues and between social issues. And I think that Republicans are recognizing this, and that's the angle, that's the strategy that they're trying to go down. All right, you guys, that's the video. If you liked it, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.